Hi, I'm Chris Nedza, lead entrepreneur in residence of the Advanced Technology Development Center at Georgia Tech. We're the state of Georgia's technology incubator. Welcome to Season 1 of the ATDC podcast, Executive Bytes. We focus on the startup founders in our portfolio, what sparked them to launch their companies, the market problem they've solved, and even how they overcame the thoughts of quitting when times get rough. Enjoy. All right, welcome to Executive Bytes. I'm super excited today. I'm excited every time we do these things because you guys, the CEOs that we have, are incredibly smart and inspiring. So my co-host today is Louise Wasilewski.
Yes.
Right on. Who's the CEO of Achilles, and we had you as a guest, and it was super interesting what your company's doing. You'll have to tune into her episode to learn more. But today we're going to talk about Mitesh Rao and Omny Health. It's a super interesting company. You're not my typical CEO because you've actually been an emergency ER doc, right? So give us a little background of you.
Yeah, happy to. First off, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, man.
Wonderful to be here. So my background, I'm an emergency medicine physician. Spent most of my career as a health system executive. So prior to starting Omny, I helped lead safety and quality at Stanford, where I'm still faculty. And then before that, was at Northwestern, where I helped lead innovation. And was a health services researcher, actually, originally. And then before that, trained at Yale, where I did residency, fellowship, and was a clinical scholar with the Robert Johnson Foundation. So always spent most of my career on the healthcare data side and really grew up within the health system executive world.
So, and then somehow you came up with this idea of Omny Health.
I would say...
I know what it is, but tell our audience what it is.
Yeah, I mean, Omny came out of my frustration, where I kept having researchers, biotech researchers, medical device companies, early AI companies coming wanting to partner on the vast troves of data that we generate within the provider world. But the challenge was, how do you get access to that at scale? And how do you get access to that in a usable way? And then how do you do it securely and compliantly? So what I saw consistently was that there was no infrastructure to enable it. And we were really struggling to do things. And I couldn't find a solution that would enable it. So I did what I guess any
crazy
masochistic entrepreneur will do. I threw caution to the wind, burned all the bridge, burned the ships and forged into the forest and raised capital and started a company, which is now turned into a national data layer that today covers the lives of over 80 million patients. And next year we'll scale into 150 million.
Okay, so let me see if I got that right. Louise, I mean, you're pretty smart. If you can articulate this, good, let's do it. But I think what you said is there's data in the hospital systems, and people, like researchers, need access to that data, but there was no real way to get the data. There's all kinds of cases going on, all kinds of health issues going on, all kinds of,
Well, the infrastructure is not designed for data sharing. It's designed for data hoarding. So inevitably you have...
Well, and it's designed for patient privacy too, right?
Patient privacy obviously needs to be the center point of everything that we do, right? But even moving data out of many of these archaic systems just becomes so challenging. And then if you've ever seen data coming out of one hospital, you've seen data coming out of one hospital. There's just enormous amounts of variability in how the data is coded, stored, modeled. And so what you have is this fragmented universe of data. I always like to say that we are, in healthcare, data rich, but very information poor, because that data is really hard to use. And so we designed Omny to be the pipes, the rails, if you will, that takes data coming out of all these organizations nationally, whether it's a large IDN, a cancer center,
IDN.
Specialty group.
What's an IDN?
An integrated delivery network. So think a big, massive health system.
Hospital system.
Yeah, or a community health system, or an academic medical center, or even a big dermatology group, right?
So
all their data.
So let me ask you a question here. There's CPT codes, there's ICD, there's FHIR. There are tons of standards in healthcare around the data, how the data is tagged and coded for billing. What's the gap between that and what you're doing?
I mean, there's a lot. And inevitably, what you find out is that often the data that comes out of the source systems, it's messy, it's incomplete, it's coded with tons of heterogeneity between different sources. And so you end up having to normalize clean and structured data coming out of one organization, and now imagine data coming across 80 million patients and doing that at scale.
So you built a way to get the data, make it safe, secure, anonymized, and useful for
end researchers. So think about biotech research in phase 2 onward, think about safety and efficacy research, think of quality improvement initiatives. We scale pretty strongly in many of these spaces. Now we're starting to even touch the AI space, which is fascinating. When you think about it, right? Healthcare AI, its biggest Achilles heel right now is access to data. Data in healthcare is really difficult to get a hold of, and so Omny, for example, sits across 4 billion unstructured notes, which form an incredible repository of foundational knowledge that can be used to actually train AI in healthcare. And that's an interesting piece, right? So we're at that inflection point now where finally the industry is starting to catch up with other industries that have frankly been ahead when it comes to data and building out things like infrastructure, capabilities, scale that will allow us to step into that data-driven future.
So the audience that's listening, who should be calling you up going, I need you?
Well, I would say end users of data, we're always welcome to talk to you. So whether you're a researcher, whether you are developing solutions, the center point of what everything that Omny does is focused on patient-centered propositions, right? So we obviously only partner with groups that are really looking to further medicine, improve healthcare.
Right.
So that is the sort of broader encompassing piece. And then I would say on the groups that have access to data, that world is wide. We have everyone from large tech companies and remote monitoring platforms to large health systems, to community groups who are all bringing their data in. And our focus is on creating effectively this common language of data across the country. So you now have a one-layer consistent data that is deep, that is comprehensive, that has all the historical, but then refreshes at a great cadence, so it's timely. Once you have that together, it can form the building blocks for just about anything.
So let me ask a different question here. I've seen a lot of companies that have focused on clinical trials, right? And working in the criminal justice space, we have randomized controlled trials, and one of the troubles with RCTs is they're very small numbers, and you can't really be sure that those results will scale, particularly when psychology is involved. But if I'm listening to what you're saying, it isn't randomized controlled trials, it's looking at what has happened in the past and learning from that, rather than I've got a new drug and I want to find 1,000 people to run it against. So this feels like it's a completely different type of learning that's available from RCTs.
Well, it's a little of both, right? So right now we'll power everything like health economics outcomes research, safety and efficacy research, but then now we're seeing a lot of groups use the data layer to help identify candidates for trials, right? Because inevitably you're looking for a needle in a haystack, often when you're looking at rare diseases, and it becomes really a complicated approach. And so in Omny's data layer, in a de-identified format, you can find patients who could potentially be candidates and be able to align them to opportunities. Now, the nice thing is that our data layer really does represent the nation. It's patients across all 50 states, every geography, every ethnicity, every archetype of provider. So it's a democratized way to ensure that everyone has the opportunity to participate, that we're actually looking at this on a national level. This is also why the safety and efficacy research ends up coming through our data layer, because inevitably if you're going to try to ensure that a device or a medication is safe, you want to be safe for all populations, not just a narrow window in, say, academic medical centers.
Okay, so it's not easy. It's tough. I look at you, I see you work very hard, and sometimes you get tired, you're worn out. All right, have you ever wanted to quit?
So, it's interesting. Entrepreneurship it's a test in resilience, I would say, on a given week, because almost every day you could have this roller coaster of emotions.
Yeah.
There are incredible highs, there are incredible lows. There's a lot of bouncing back and forth. And as an entrepreneur, you need to be helping to lead that charge. You need to be somebody that the rest of the company can follow and rely on. You need to be able to maintain that strength. It's not easy, but it's the journey we signed up for. And
how do you do it? How do you do that? How do you get through those? The highs are easy to get through. You just wahoo it, and then 3 minutes later, a low could be such as.
Yeah, I mean, you could run into issues with a product that you really had a lot of hope on, and it just doesn't seem to be scaling like it should, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of things that can just happen in a given day. There's a few things I rely on. One, I've got an incredible network of entrepreneurs, fellow execs who I can lean on and rely on. I can call up when I'm having a bad day, and they're there to be able to listen. They're there to be able to support, and that's incredible to me. The second is family. My family forms a really strong support structure for me. You know, they signed up for this journey. They knew that I was taking a huge leap to go start a company, and they took that bet with me. You know, most startups don't survive the early phases, and here we are scaling into growth. So, you know, we're a success story that forged through many layers of, you know, calling those extinction levels that happen with companies. But it wasn't easy, right? It wasn't a journey that happened overnight, and my family has been that resilience for me.
You know, most people think, oh, you're the CEO, you can work what you want, do what you want to do. But, you know, when it's rough, seriously, there have been days when I was the CEO and I was like, man, I want to quit. I'm like, what am I doing this for? You can't just quit.
No.
You've got investors depending on you. You've got employees. Like, you can't just pick up and quit.
No, you forge ahead. You work hard, and then sometimes you don't sleep. Sometimes you forget to eat. Sometimes you drink way too much coffee. But you figure it out, right? Like that's I think the real tipping point in companies is that people either, when the challenge comes, they either give up or they forge ahead. And a lot of people, you know, can't make it past that level. If you can forge ahead, you find a path.
What's your biggest challenge in building your company? Sorry.
I think we're probably going in a very similar direction, right? One of the things that makes you successful as an entrepreneur is when you get stuck, you ask questions to find a pathway forward that you hadn't seen. So could you talk about an obstacle that you overcame and how you overcame that?
Yeah, well, I would say in many ways also as an entrepreneur, you learn to not fixate on a belief. You learn to really let the facts come in, because sometimes what you think is the barrier is actually an opportunity, and you should kind of go with it or work around. Like, that's the thing, is like sometimes you learn when to fight and when not to fight. So, you know, I think back to the very first origins of the company. We were trying to run around and beg anyone, any health system to just partner with us, take a chance on us, and I would help that I came from that world, right? So I had a little bit of credibility, but here we were, like a handful of people and a terrible slide deck running in and talking to folks about data, and they're like, whoa, like, no, like, why don't you come back when you're a real thing? And you know, there was a moment where my co-founder and I looked at each other and we were like, man, like, how are we going to actually do this? What are we going to do? We've got no lick of, we were a data company without a lick of data. But you know, we buckled down and we said, well, what do we need to do to actually have that conversation? What do we need to be able to supply? And then how do we line up the first one? Because you keep knocking on doors and eventually someone opens the door. And you get that first break. And with that first break, your job is to delight that customer, to make them so happy that they tell others, that they become the reference point for you, and then you can build that coalition of customers from there. And that's been our mission ever since. We've always been centered on how can we delight our customers? How can we make this truly powerfully valuable to everyone involved? And that's why we built it as a democratic data layer, where when we build these partnerships, it's benefit across the board. Everybody, we move healthcare forward at a rapid pace, and are able to be proud of that.
What's one thing that you would change about the healthcare system if you could? You've got Mitesh's magic wand.
So I would say that if I could, I'd rewind time back to when we were first incorporating a lot of the, call it, tech stack, and I would have really pushed for a much more flexible, dynamic approach that would have allowed data to really, truly be accessible. That's, you know, Omny exists because that didn't happen. I basically would have, you know, willed myself out of existence, this company. But that's something that I think has really held us back. Like, I look at our industry and I look at how far we are behind the data game compared to so many other groups who have been able to leverage data. So many other industries leverage data to rapidly improve things.
Isn't that funny? Because, you know, what's the one place we depend on them knowing what the heck they're talking about?
It's healthcare, right?
Yeah, healthcare.
The data is so critical. But now we have a sacred duty in healthcare, right? It's not just like any other data. We have to protect patients. We have to protect identities. We've got to ensure patient safety. There's a lot of regulatory rails in place, and purposefully, right? And so any company in this space, that has to be their North Star. The patient is your North Star. That's your focus. Everything you do flows up to that. everything that you accomplish flows up to that. And as long as you do that, you're on the right mission.
Yeah. And those sorts of issues are very similar in criminal justice, right? We've got to think about the incarcerated person, think about the victim, think about privacy, safety, security. So a lot of that sounds very similar to me. And just the challenges with sharing data across environments. But let me ask you a related question. What about globally? You know, the U.S. health system is quite distinctive.
We don't spend more than everybody else, do we?
I'm not going to get into healthcare economics.
That's a whole nother.
But I think it's it's an interesting question. The data sharing across national boundaries.
It's an interesting piece. We are focused in the U.S. just because there's so much left to do here for now. But we talk about it often. We talk about the next phase of business where we grow into starting to do work internationally. You run into a ton of pieces, right? There's different regulations, but interestingly enough, we're built for GDPR. That's how we designed the platform, because even though the regulations aren't the same in the US, we took the position that eventually those regulations would cross the ocean and come over to the US, and we wanted to be prepared in building something that would be a lasting, sustainable data layer. The other challenge you run into is, of course, language, right? When you're looking at 4 billion unstructured notes in English, we've built the natural language processing to digest that. All of a sudden you introduce Portuguese and you've got to build something new, you know? So languages have to be sort of one of those barrier pieces. And the other part that you run into, of course, is just how data gets structured. Inevitably there's variability.
I thought you were going to go somewhere else with that. It's a good question, but I was wondering, how do we stack up against other countries in terms of our data sharing and the problem that you're tackling here? Do you have any sense of what's going on overseas and how they're doing compared to what we're doing?
No, I mean, some of the other countries have really tapped into their data to be able to leverage it for research because they've got national health systems, and so they've got a little more of a centralized approach than we do in the US. We do find that in some countries. So there's definitely, I mean, the recognition in healthcare that data can change everything is always there. It all depends on how easy it is to overcome that burden. And unfortunately for us in the US, that burden is quite high. And even though I get very excited about regulation changing like TAFCA, it doesn't change how complicated the data it is to use, right? That you can get access to data, but getting access to garbage is access to garbage.
So how fired up about your the direction of the company are you?
I'm pumped. I mean, we're entering 2025. We are a network that's about to hit 100 million patients. We'll grow to 150 million next year.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
150 million.
Out of what, total population of 330, 360, something
Right,
like
did the math
that?
on that, right? So
it's a rounding error.
Decent market share.
It's a decent market share of, and really it's not about market share, it's about representation, right? Because the one thing that we really push is that this data represents the nation. If it represents the nation, we know that when we do the type of research that we support, it's going to benefit everyone, it's going to account for everyone, right? We want that equality across the board.
And here you are at ATDC in Atlanta, Georgia.
It's our hometown.
Lead the charge. Mitesh, thank you. Louise, it's always awesome spending time with you.
Hey, thank you both.
Thanks for everything that you're doing too. I think what you're doing can it's life changing. I mean, it's very frustrating to know that the data should be working well with research, and the solution you're providing is going to bridge that. So I know that's going to impact my life and probably everybody else's life in this room. So and on the podcast. Thank you, Mitesh.
Yeah, I appreciate you both. Thanks for having me on.
All right.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the ATDC podcast. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel, like, and share or connect wherever you get your podcasts. Please be sure to follow us on social media. Our handle is @ATDC on X, LinkedIn, and Instagram.